Welcome. Tonight, let your body rest and your mind drift back to a city that never truly slept. The sun has long set on ancient Athens, but under its fading embers, one man refused to join the illusions of comfort. He chose the ground over a bed, the street over the home, the bite over the whisper. Diogenes, a name often reduced to a man with a lamp. But tonight, we'll peel away the myth and sink into the silence he never explained. Let's begin at the moment you became a cynic, not by choice, but because the world gave you no other. You open your eyes, not in a bed, not in a home, stone, cracked, and sun-warmed. That's your mattress now. You're on the steps of the agora, where people step over you, not around. The smell of roasted fish from a nearby stall teases your hunger, but you have no coin, no pouch, only the rags clinging to your skin, and a ceramic bowl half cracked for water or begging. The night is warm, but not kind. Ants tickle your legs. Laughter echoes, not laughter for you, but laughter about you. And you lie still, eyes open, pretending not to care, training yourself not to care. Your head rests on your arm. It's numb, but that's the price of no illusions. You've watched others all day, buying things they don't need, praising statues they don't know, arguing about shadows on walls. They look at you like a stray, but you've seen their eyes flinch, not from disgust, but fear. You are the mirror they refuse to look into. A man with nothing who needs nothing. No gold, no name, no God in your mouth. Only the truth. And the truth doesn't pay well, but it keeps you light. They ask if you're mad. You ask if they're asleep. When a boy spits near your bowl, you don't flinch. You look at him until he leaves, awkward and small. A woman passes, clutches her pearls. You bark, not in anger, but to remind them you are not a man in chains. You are a dog off the leash. You've trained yourself to bark instead of beg, to bite instead of bow. It's not cruelty, it's clarity. The world doesn't deserve your silence, but tonight you offer it anyway. Your stomach growls, loud like thunder in a quiet grove. But you don't chase food anymore. You let it come, or not. Once, that would have panicked you. Now, it humbles you. You drink water from a public fountain, cold, slightly muddy. It tastes alive. You chew on a piece of stale bread given to you by an old man who didn't speak. In that silence, you understood something. True kindness needs no audience. Even at night, Athens murmurs. Drunken voices, hooves on stone, sandaled feet pacing in circles. And you've become invisible. No one stops you. No one thanks you. You're neither hero nor thief, just there, like a crack in the wall. Unnoticed, but real. You've learned to hear the lies between syllables, to smell pride before it speaks, to sit without speaking, long enough for truth to walk in. The stone is no longer just cold. It has memorized the shape of your spine. Your skin sticks slightly to it in places where the day's sweat never dried. There is no blanket, only night air that shifts between gentle and biting. You don't shiver, not because it's warm, but because you've told your body that comfort is a trap. And traps are everywhere, in soft beds, in gold coins, in borrowed praise. You lie still, not because you are calm, but because motion would make you hope, and hope is a longer leash. There's a rat somewhere nearby. You hear it nibbling on something left behind. You do not flinch. You do not curse it. You recognize it. It is like you, hungry, small, unwelcome. It survives, not by permission, but by presence. You understand now that survival is not heroic. It is a quiet defiance. You survive without worship, without debt, without hiding. Like the rat, like the dust, like the dog. From across the square, a young man watches you. You meet his gaze. He doesn't look away, not out of curiosity, but confusion. He sees your dirt, your stillness, your stare. He wonders if you're mad or free. You don't blink. You let him drown in the question. He'll forget you tomorrow, but tonight, for one moment, he envied you. Its notes drip like warm honey into the cold corners of the square. You let them pass through you, not as joy, not as beauty, but as sound. You do not chase meanings. You do not decorate the world. You let it be. Ugly, kind, indifferent. You breathe. The only act left that costs nothing. And even that, you do quietly, so it won't be stolen. Dawn approaches. The stones shift color beneath you. Purple, then gray, then gold. A vendor begins to set up her stall. You close your eyes. Not to sleep, but to soften the brightness. Today, you will walk again, barefoot, unwashed, unwashed, unwashed. The world will pretend you don't exist. And in that forgetting, you will be most free. You will speak only when silence fails. And even then, only what cannot be bought. The morning doesn't begin. It just leaks in. Light spills over the market stones like wine no one asked for. You sit up slowly. Your joints complain, but not loudly. Pain has become a language, familiar, blunt, no longer threatening. You stretch one leg, then the other, as if the ground needs reminding that you're still here. Across the square, a vendor eyes you like a stain on polished marble. She doesn't say anything. She never does. But you know what her silence means. You are tolerated, not welcomed. The unspoken rule: if you move slowly, speak less, and never ask for anything, you can stay. For now. Your stomach has made peace with hunger. It no longer begs, just notes its own emptiness like a cold wind through a hollow pipe. You walk, not because you're going anywhere, but because standing still invites questions, questions you won't answer. The streets of Athens are narrow, alive with smells. Fresh bread, donkey sweat, burning oil, figs crushed beneath sandals. A child points at you. His mother pulls his hand away. You say nothing. You are not a lesson. You are not a warning. You are simply a man without costume, and that frightens more than it teaches. You find a patch of shade behind a crumbling column. It leans like a drunk philosopher, half listening to a debate it once cared about. You sit, your eyes half close, not from sleep, but from detachment. A dog approaches, ribs showing, tail low. It sniffs your toes, then lies beside you. You do not touch it. There is no need. You are the same. Neither of you wants to be owned. You share the shade. You share the breath. That is enough. That is everything. You hear voices debating near the stoa. Young men, wrapped in fresh tunics, arguing about justice, about forms, about whether good is one or many. You smile, not mockingly, just wearily. You have lived too close to the belly of the world to care much about its definitions. You've seen men steal bread and call it survival. Others steal land and call it virtue. Justice, you've learned, is often just the story the strong tell themselves before sleep. Someone tosses a coin toward your bowl. You don't move. You let it clink and sit there. An old habit, this test. If the coin stays, it was yours. If someone takes it back, it was never meant for you. Either way, you lose nothing. You own nothing. And so, no one owns you. Freedom is not just walking away from chains. It's learning never to need what they guarded. The sun climbs higher. The street bakes. The dog beside you moves on, chasing a scent or maybe a lie. You stay still. The silence inside you is louder than the world outside. Not empty, just quiet, like a truth too soft for words. A boy approaches and asks if you're the mad one who sleeps outside the temple. You nod once. He stares. Then he asks why. You don't answer. Instead, you gesture to the ground, the sun, the bowl, the boy himself. Everything he needs to know is already there. He just doesn't know how to read it. A woman leaves a fig beside your foot. She doesn't look at you. You don't thank her. The gift is clean. No transaction. No speech. You eat it slowly. The skin is tough. The inside, sweet. You chew each bite like it might teach you something. It doesn't, but you chew anyway. Because taste is one of the few pleasures left that doesn't require explanation or apology. Someone insults you in passing. You don't react. You've long since retired from that theater. You've noticed that insults only stick when you believe they might be true. But if you've burned your name, your pride, your mask, there's nothing left for their words to land on. They pass through you like wind through broken walls, and the ruin stands. As the day deepens, the city becomes heavier. The merchants louder, the priests more polished, the philosophers more certain. But you fade. You are becoming less each hour. Less man, more presence. Less voice, more shadow. Not in defeat, but in refinement. What's left of you is what cannot be traded, taught, or torn away. And in this thinning, you find something close to peace. Not joy, not clarity, just the simple, dogged endurance of truth. The day grows long without asking you. Shadows stretch like tired limbs across the marble steps. You sit again, this time closer to the edge of the agora, where people gather to pretend they're not pretending. A man in fine robes yells about virtue to a circle of nodding heads. His voice is polished like his sandals. His eyes dart to see who's listening, and that is how you know it isn't truth he's after, it's applause. You watch him, not with contempt, but with that deep wariness only those without masks can feel. You once chased the same ghosts, okay? Now you let them pass through you, one by one. No resistance. No reverence. A woman with painted lips offers you leftover olives wrapped in cloth. You accept, not with thanks, but with silence. The same silence she offered you. There is something pure in that exchange. No titles, no promises, just one moment of shared breath. She walks away before you finish chewing. That, too, is mercy. You do not need witnesses. You need time. Nearby, a boy slaps another, calling him slave-born. No one reacts. You hear the word, feel the bruise it leaves in the air. You remember what it felt like to matter so little that even your pain was invisible. That memory lives in your shoulder blades, your knees, your teeth. You do not speak. You do not teach. You let the moment sit. Not all truths must be answered. Some just need to be survived. You walk slowly, feet cracked, sandals thinning. Dust softens each step, like Athens itself is trying to forget you. You pass the temple. Men inside burn incense to honor gods they bargain with like merchants. You do not enter. You've learned that truth does not need fragrance. It smells like sweat, rot, and sometimes figs. The gods you know are silent, bare, and rarely grant what's asked. But they never lie. That's enough. A pair of guards pause near you. One snickers. He thinks he's a dog, he says. You don't answer. You tilt your head slightly, then scratch your ear with your foot. He flinches, unsure if it's mockery or madness. You've seen both. You live in between. You watch him walk away, more confused than before. That is your gift. You do not correct their misunderstanding. You let them keep it. Like a child clutching a sharp toy. You crouch by a well. Look into it, not for water, for reflection. The face looking back is weathered, distant, stripped of ambition. But behind the sun-dark skin and matted hair, there's a stillness, not peace. Something colder, cleaner, like the absence of needing. You nod once to yourself, not in pride, but in confirmation. You are no longer trying to become. You are just being. Another man calls you filth as he steps around you. He's dressed like a scholar. You look up. Yes, you say, and it wipes off easier than lies. He blinks, then laughs. Not because it was funny, but because truth disarmed him. He walks faster. You stay seated. The wind shifts. You pull your cloak tighter. It smells like dust and time. The sun dips. Children chase each other with wooden sticks. You remember being young, though the details have faded. What you recall best is the moment you first realized grown men lie. That memory stayed. It grew like moss, quietly, insistently. You touch your chest. Your heartbeat is slow, steady. You are still alive, but not entangled. That's the difference. That's the lesson. You lie down again, not because you're tired, but because standing feels like performance. You've stopped performing. There is no crowd, only sky and pigeons and distant laughter. You watch a beetle drag a breadcrumb across the stone, patient and absurd. You nod to it. It nods back in its own way. This, too, is dialogue. And when the last light pools in the cracks of the plaza, you close your eyes, not to sleep, but to sink into the silence Diogenes left behind, into the wound where illusion used to live, into the place where dogs don't bark for approval, only to remind the world they are still here. The wind picks up, dry and lazy, brushing your cheek like a tired parent. You don't react, not to the breeze, not to the voices behind it. You've grown past reacting. You've become the stone people trip over but never see. A merchant grumbles as he passes, pulling a cart that squeals in protest. He spits near you, not out of anger, but habit. That's what you've become to most. A spot in the city's rhythm, an imperfection. You do not move. You do not move. You do not flinch. You let it fall beside you. Let them define you. Let them misunderstand. That's their burden, not yours. You roll onto your side, adjusting your body like shifting an old argument. Slowly, carefully, each joint resists, but not in protest, just memory. Your hip reminds you of the storm 3 days ago. Your shoulder reminds you of the boy who ran into you, chasing a ball, and didn't say sorry. Everything is written into you now. The weather, the laughter, the bruises. You are becoming an archive of the ignored. From across the plaza, an older man stares. His beard is trimmed, his clothes careful. He approaches reluctantly, sits beside you. He asks, softly, "Aren't you ashamed?" You blink. A question arrives like an echo of a life you no longer live. Ashamed. Of what? Of hunger, of piss-worn nights, of not playing along. You meet his gaze. Should I be proud of pretending? The man lowers his eyes. He does not stay long. A child tugs your cloak, offers you a stone. It's smooth, white, warmed by the sun. You take it. You don't know why. Maybe to remember that not everything given has a purpose. Maybe because the child didn't ask for anything in return. Maybe because you, too, once handed things to strangers before learning that gifts are often debts in disguise. The stone has no name. It fits your hand. You don't let it go. The sun leans westward, spilling gold across roofs and brows. You squint, not from the light, but from the memory it stirs. A day once, long ago, you were praised, applauded, rewarded. It felt like honey until it turned sour. Praise makes you hungry in the wrong places. It feeds the mask, not the soul. You touch your throat. That's where the hunger used to live. It's quieter now, less urgent. Someone offers you bread, fresh, warm. You take it. Slowly, you eat it, slowly. You eat it, slowly. Not because you want to savor it, but because you've forgotten how not to. Every bite is a reminder that the body still hopes, even when the mind lets go. You chew like someone lighting a candle in a cave, quietly, gratefully, without ceremony. A pair of philosophers walk past, arguing over the nature of desire. One says it must be overcome. The other says it must be harnessed. You say nothing, but you think it must first be seen for what it is, a leash tied to nothing. You watch them disappear down the street, still debating, still certain. You are not certain of anything anymore. And that, strangely, has set you free. You close your eyes, just for a moment. Behind your lids, the city fades, the voices thin, the hunger softens. There is only the rhythm of your breath and the memory of silence. You've learned that most truths arrive when you stop looking for them. Like a dog that only comes when you stop calling. The fig tree above you drops a leaf. It lands beside your face. You stare at it. Its veins, its edges, its smallness. You wonder how many people will pass it by and never see it. You wonder how many have passed you the same way. You don't resent them. You just notice. You shift once more. The ground welcomes you like an old enemy, familiar, unforgiving. You place the white stone from the child under your head. It presses slightly into your temple. You let it. You fall asleep that way, not because it's comfortable, but because discomfort, when chosen, becomes a kind of shelter. The night folds over Athens again, slow and heavy, like a worn-out curtain. You awaken, not startled, just aware. The street has changed. Fewer voices now, more wind. You lie still, listening. A door creaks shut. These are the lullabies of the city. Imperfect, accidental, and real. You do not miss music. You've come to prefer sounds that don't try to impress you. The groan of old wood, the scratch of rats, your own breath when the world forgets you're still here. Your body aches, but you no longer call it pain. It's just the way the flesh remembers time. The bruise on your hip is fading. The cut on your toe is not infected. That is enough. You sit up slowly, like rising from a conversation with the dead. The stars above you are indifferent. That, too, is a comfort. They do not reward virtue. They do not punish pride. They shine. Nothing more. You envy them. You walk again. Slowly, the stones are slick with dew. Your soles adjust. Your balance is precise. The result of practice, not grace. You've learned to walk like a shadow, to pass through spaces without marking them. Near the temple, someone sleeps upright, back against the column, arms crossed like shields. You nod once as you pass. No one chooses to sleep that way unless they have something to guard. You have nothing left to protect. And that is your armor. There's a brazier glowing in the corner. A few men gather around it, muttering, coughing, eating from a shared pot. You watch from a distance. One looks over. "Come," he says, not warmly, but not unkindly either. You join them. You do not speak. The warmth kisses your fingers like something long forgotten. Someone hands you a chunk of root, boiled, soft. You chew slowly, again. Always slowly, The food is bland, but the silence is rich. You sit among strangers, nameless and equal. No one asks who you are. That is the greatest courtesy of all. Later, alone again, you crouch by a cracked wall, scratching a circle in the dirt with a stick. A child's act, perhaps, but to you it is ritual. The circle means nothing added, nothing missing. It reminds you that boundaries are imaginary. Lines drawn to pretend ownership, pretend identity, pretend control. The circle erases all that, just earth, dust. An owl cries in the olive tree above you. A long, slow exhale of the night. You look up. For a moment, the bird stares back. Two animals in silence, both awake for reasons they can't explain. You nod. It doesn't fly away. You don't need it to. You wander toward the edge of the city. The fields begin. The ground softens. There's a breeze that smells like fig bark and wet wool. You sit on a stone, worn by 100 other bodies, most of them forgotten. You close your eyes. The world hums, low and wide. You are not dreaming. You are not thinking. You are dissolving gently into now. In the distance, a rooster calls, a lie of urgency. You smile. The world insists on cycles: sleep, wake, sell, buy, praise, judge. But you no longer move in circles. You move in silence, in refusal, in patient distance. The rooster does not own your dawn. You rise, stretch, piss behind a bush, scratch your neck, adjust your cloak. These are your prayers. These are your truths. No one needs to hear them. No God needs to bless them. But they are yours, and no one can take them. You walk back toward the city. You walk like a man who's already arrived. And as the sky turns pale and the first cart rumbles into the agora, you find your spot on the stone again. You sit, legs crossed, bowl beside you, the white pebble under your hand. A man might say, "You do nothing," and he'd be wrong. You are doing the hardest thing of all. You are staying awake before the barrel, before the barking, before the world labeled him a madman. There was just a boy named Diogenes, born not in Athens, but in Sinope, a coastal town that smelled of salt, money, and fear. His father was a banker, a manipulator of coins, a dealer in trust. But something soured. The records are thin, the truth even thinner. Some say Diogenes defaced currency. Others say he mocked the very idea of value. What is known is this: the city expelled him. And when you're thrown out by a place that worships money, you begin to question the altar itself. He arrived in Athens without fanfare. No gold, no status, no friends, just a sharp tongue and eyes that saw too much. While others bowed at marble gods and orated beneath olive trees, he sat in the dust, watching. He watched men speak of justice and then bribe judges. He watched philosophers debate virtue while refusing bread to beggars. He saw the mask and refused to wear it. He became the crack in the vase, the tear in the robe, the whisper that unravels sermons, not by shouting, by being impossible to ignore. He found a barrel, not the kind for wine, but for storage, round, hollow, crude. He dragged it near the agora and made it his home, not because it was comfortable, but because it was unhideable. A man sleeping in a barrel cannot lie about who he is. The city watched in amusement, then discomfort, then rage. He begged, but not with humility. He begged like a dare. He asked for food like he was doing you a favor by accepting it. Some gave, most didn't. He kept asking. When asked what he was doing with his life, he answered, "I am looking for an honest man." And then he wandered the marketplace with a lit lamp in broad daylight. The light wasn't for him. It was for the city. A mirror held to their eyes so bright they had to look away. He knew what he was doing. Every act was a bite, but not to harm, to wake, to strip, to remind. One day, he stood outside Plato's academy, where students whispered and postured in robes to clean to trust. When asked what he thought of Plato's definition of man as a featherless biped, Diogenes returned the next day, holding a plucked chicken. "Behold," he said, "Plato's man." The joke landed like a stone in water. Plato's students laughed. Plato did not. He called Diogenes a Socrates gone mad. Diogenes smiled. Madness, to him, was just the name sane men gave to unlicensed truth. He wore no shoes, owned no bed, carried only a cloak, a staff, a bowl. One day he saw a child drinking from his hands and threw the bowl away. "A child has surpassed me in simplicity," he said. This was not performance. This was philosophy, not on scrolls, but in skin. He lived what others only theorized, and the city hated him for it. He mocked Alexander the Great. That's not metaphor. The conqueror himself came to see Diogenes. Surrounded by guards, Alexander approached and asked, "Is there anything I can do for you?" Diogenes didn't bow, didn't smile. He simply said, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." The courtyard fell silent. Alexander laughed. "If I were not Alexander," he said, "I would be Diogenes." It was the highest compliment Diogenes never asked for and never returned. He urinated in public, defecated without shame, masturbated in the marketplace. not from madness, but to strip society's fear of the body. If only hunger could be satisfied by rubbing my stomach, he once sighed. He wasn't crude. He was honest. So honest, it hurt. He believed shame was the rust of the soul. He sought to scrub it off with every act that made people turn away. He was not a teacher, not formally, but he had followers, people drawn not to comfort, but to courage. Young men who grew tired of rhetoric and longed to feel what it meant to lose everything false and still live. He told them not to write down his words. Look at my life, he said. That is the lesson. And so they watched, a man with nothing, whose words still ripple through time like a stone skipped across centuries. And when he died, no tomb, no temple, just a stray dog sleeping near a barrel. No priests, no eulogy, no gold coins on the eyes. Just the wind, the silence, and a city that never quite figured out whether it hated him or needed him. They called him a dog, not as insult, but as truth. Diogenes didn't just accept the label, he wore it like armor. When asked why he lived like an animal, he said, because animals don't lie. A dog doesn't hide its hunger, doesn't flatter kings, doesn't speak what it doesn't mean. A dog sleeps where it can, eats when it must, bites when pushed. Diogenes chose this form not out of failure, but precision, to remove every layer civilization added to the soul, until only the raw outline of a human remained. He walked barefoot through markets, staring at the wealthy, not with envy, but pity. The more they have, he said, the more they fear losing it. He saw gold not as treasure, but as chains polished, until the prisoner forgot he wore them. He carried a staff not for status, but to remind himself that sometimes the world needs a prod, not a prayer. His cloak, tattered, unwashed, held no meaning except this: he didn't care if you approved of it. And that, to many, was the most dangerous idea of all. Philosophers debated the nature of the good. Diogenes didn't argue. He pointed at the sun, at a dog sleeping in the dirt, at a man eating bread alone. There, he'd say, is your proof. His logic wasn't clean, but it was real. He did not try to win arguments, he tried to end them. He believed truth wasn't something you say. It was something you live, something that survived every question without needing to answer. At night, he curled inside his barrel, not because it was ideal, but because it was enough. The stars above him were not decorations. They were companions, silent, distant, honest, no ambition, no lies, just burning until death without applause. He admired them. He resembled them. He needed nothing from them. That was the point. People brought him food, sometimes out of kindness, sometimes curiosity. He accepted it all, with the same indifferent nod. He ate what was given. He never stored, never hoarded. Food is like philosophy, he once said. Take only what you can digest. Some days he fasted, not by choice, but by fate. But even in hunger, he did not complain. Pain to him was information, a whisper from the body, not a punishment from the gods. Children would sometimes follow him, giggling, mocking, pretending to bark. He let them. He never scolded them. They, too, were animals, still unpolished by pride. He seemed to like children more than adults. They didn't ask for approval. They didn't pretend to know things. They lived closer to the ground, like he did, before shame was taught, before masks were stitched onto their faces. One day, a group of young men, wealthy, educated, came to him and asked, "What must we do to become wise?" Diogenes didn't answer. He stood up, walked to a muddy ditch, stepped in, and began stomping. The water splashed. The mud coated his legs. The men stared, confused. "Why do you look?" he asked. "If wisdom were found in ditches, I'd have it already." They left, angry. That, too, was part of the lesson. He was arrested once, accused of mocking the gods. When brought before the court, he asked, "Do the gods take offense, or only their servants?" The silence was long. The judge let him go. Diogenes bowed, not out of respect, but exaggeration. Even his mockery had a strange kind of grace. He lived like a ghost among the living, too present to be ignored, too free to be caught. And yet, somehow, he endured. Not by force, not by wealth, but by the sheer weight of refusing to play. In a world of illusion, sometimes the only weapon left is honesty. There were no disciples in the way other schools had them. No robes, no ranks, no tidy lectures beneath shaded colonnades. But still, they came. Not to learn from Diogenes, but to learn why he didn't care to teach. A few followed him at a distance first, watching him sleep in alleys, urinate on statues, speak truths that drew both laughter and fists. They expected rituals. Instead, they found a man who threw away a bowl because fingers worked just as well. That was the lesson. Every possession is a question. Do you need this, or were you told you did? They once asked him what books he read. He pointed to a rotting fish carcass. "There's your library." More honest than poetry. They laughed, then gagged, then kept thinking about it for weeks. His answers were like slivers of bone. You didn't notice when they pierced you, but you couldn't get them out. One student, Crates, gave up his wealth entirely. He didn't announce it. He just stopped going home. He followed Diogenes, not to be praised, but to burn off what didn't matter. Crates smiled more than Diogenes. He barked less. The fire was the same. The city tried to forget him. It failed. His presence was a bruise on the skin of Athens, always tender, always reminding. At festivals, he walked through the crowds, pointing out vanity like a man sweeping filth off the altar. You dress like gods, but fear ants. You speak of virtue, while your slaves carry your lies. You call this freedom. You're just dressed up livestock. They were reflections, held so close to the face that people had no room to look away. He said often, "I do not insult, I describe." And it was true. He did not invent ugliness. He revealed it. He called beggars more honest than kings. He called dogs more noble than generals. He called himself a philosopher, not because he knew, but because he had finally run out of pretending. He had no patience for pride. A politician once approached him with gifts: grapes, dates, cheese wrapped in clean linen. Diogenes took the basket, walked to a sewer, and dumped everything inside. "I'm just helping you finish what you already began," he said. The man was furious. The crowd laughed. But behind the laughter was that slow, gnawing discomfort Diogenes carried like a second shadow. He didn't destroy things. He simply refused to let them be worshipped. A nobleman once asked him why he didn't flatter the rich. Diogenes picked up a bone, tossed it, and said, "Would a dog flatter you for that?" The man was insulted. But that was the truth of it. Diogenes never pretended men were better than animals unless they behaved better. He saw no difference between wealth and leash, between crown and muzzle. He didn't want to be king of men. He wanted to stop being owned by their nonsense. When someone asked him what philosophy had given him, he answered, "The ability to be alone." But he wasn't lonely. He was rarely alone for long. People came to him like moths, curious, drawn, half afraid. He told them nothing they wanted to hear. He told them things they already knew but couldn't say aloud. "You know you're pretending," he'd say, "so stop." He once stood still for hours in a marketplace, holding nothing, speaking to no one. When asked what he was doing, he replied, "Waiting for someone to notice they're not hungry anymore." When no one did, he walked away. That, too, was the point. Most people are starving for truth, but too full of comfort to feel it. And always, always, there was the dog. Not just beside him, within him. He barked when reason was ignored. He slept when the world became too loud. He bit when lies came too close. He didn't live to provoke. He provoked to live, because in a city of empty speeches and expensive statues, sometimes the only honest voice left is the one that growls. It wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. Diogenes never woke up and asked, "How can I shock them today?" His life wasn't a performance. It was subtraction. Every act, Every refusal, every growl was an attempt to peel away what wasn't true. You could see it in how he moved through crowds, not like a man trying to change the world, but like one who had already stepped outside of it. When people shouted insults, he listened. If they rang hollow, he ignored them. If they rang true, he smiled. That one, he'd say, almost knew me. There's a story. One morning, a wealthy man brought Diogenes a loaf of bread and a fine robe, trying to impress him. Diogenes took the robe, tore it in half, used it to wipe his feet, and handed it back. "Now it's worth something," he said. The man left speechless, and the bread. Diogenes gave it to a stray dog nearby. He didn't waste it. He just knew who would eat without asking questions. He was once invited to a banquet by a politician trying to seem generous. Clean floors, polished silver, figs stacked like pyramids. Diogenes entered, dragged his feet through the hallway, and then spat on the host's ornate carpet. "Where else could I spit?" he said, "but on the most useless thing in the room." Some laughed, some gasped. The host turned pale, but no one forgot. He had no homeland. After being exiled from Sinope, he claimed to belong to the world. Cosmopolites, a citizen of the cosmos. Before flags, before borders, before tribal pride, he saw what all men shared: hunger, vanity, fear, and the hope that someone, somewhere, would finally tell the truth. He tried, not with sermons, but with stillness, not with doctrines, but with decisions. He didn't write down his beliefs, he lived them. And because he didn't ask for followers, some followed him for life. One day, a young man asked, "Master, how do I become free?" Diogenes replied, "Start by being despised." The boy was confused. "Why would I want that?" "Because if you can endure it," Diogenes said, "you've stopped borrowing your worth from others." There was no applause, just that soft, hollow ring of something true slipping quietly into someone's ribs, where it would sit and sting for years. He hated flattery, despised reputation, thought fame was a sickness. "The more people who know your name," he said, "the less you own it." He didn't hide, though. He was always visible at the gates, in the squares, at festivals. But he gave no version of himself to admire. Just the raw, blunt animal, stripped of decoration. That was his protest. That was his power. When Athens celebrated great thinkers, Diogenes was rarely mentioned, but always remembered. He was the aftertaste of philosophy, the part that lingered once the arguments ended. Others gave speeches, he gave stares. Others offered definitions. He pointed to dogs and called them professors. In sickness, he asked no one for help. When his foot became infected, he limped without complaint. When asked why he didn't see a physician, he said, "Because death is more honest." His courage was not loud. It was dry, brittle, stubborn. The kind that comes from knowing you've already lost everything false, and found that what remained was enough. He often joked that he wanted his body thrown outside the city when he died. "Let the beasts eat me," he said. "I won't need it anymore." When asked if that wasn't shameful, he laughed. Shame, a body, is only shameful when it lies. And he never lied. Not once. Not to you. Not to them. Not to himself. There's something peculiar about how the world treats those it cannot control. First, it laughs. Then it gossips. Then it grows quiet. With Diogenes, the laughter never quite stopped, but neither did the silence that followed him. It was a silence of discomfort, of reflection. He didn't change people by converting them. He changed them by surviving in full view on his own terms. He showed them that a life without pretense was possible, even if unbearable to witness. He never built a school, never drew a line in the sand to say, "This is where we begin." But his legacy seeped into cracks. Crates passed it to Zeno, who shaped Stoicism with the memory of the man in the barrel burned into his spine. Diogenes didn't write a system, but his life was a system. One where virtue meant nothing if it needed applause. Where honesty mattered more than comfort. Where discipline didn't come from others, but from the refusal to lie to yourself. He spoke often of dogs, not just as symbols of simplicity or courage, but as metaphors for the soul unchained. A dog sleeps where it pleases, bites when threatened, loves without performance, and never lies about its needs. He believed humans lost themselves in the architecture of etiquette. A smile here, a bow there, a lie between every handshake. He preferred growls, clearer, simpler, honest. A man once mocked him for washing vegetables in public. "If you learned to flatter the king," the man said, "you wouldn't need to eat cabbage." Diogenes replied, "And if you learned to eat cabbage, you wouldn't need to flatter the king." That was his genius. Not cleverness, but precision. And then he'd go back to chewing. He never hated wealth, only what it did to the spine. He never envied the powerful, only pitied the cost of being adored. He didn't tell people to become poor. He told them to become honest. If money helped you lie better, it was poison. If clothes helped you hide, they were rags. If beliefs made you cruel, they were cages. He was not against having, only against pretending. The city changed around him. Politicians came and went. Philosophers died, respected, buried with scrolls and speeches. Diogenes remained. Like a stain no rain could scrub, like a cough that won't be cured. He didn't need to win. He needed to stay. And so he did, through seasons, sickness, storms, always barefoot, always watching, always refusing. Sometimes He'd sit for hours without moving, eyes half shut. Listening, people assumed he was meditating, praying, thinking. But when asked, he said, "I'm just waiting for my thoughts to leave me alone." He didn't worship silence. He used it as shield, as mirror, as knife. You couldn't win a debate with him because he'd already discarded the need to be right. There are no paintings of him that he approved. No statues he stood still for. The few likenesses we have are flawed, too clean, too proud. The real Diogenes was skin and bones and dust. Not a sage with flowing hair, but a man who smelled like city stone and river water. A man who laughed too hard, stared too long, and never asked permission. And yet, even now, when his name is spoken, there's hesitation, because to remember Diogenes is to feel seen, not in your virtues, but in the cracks. He's not the voice in your head when you do something wise. He's the voice when you buy something you don't need, when you lie politely, when you bow too quickly. That bark inside you, that's him, still biting. He aged like stone, weathered, unmoved, and marked by everything that tried to change him. His beard grew coarse and white, but his posture never bent. He walked the same street with the same stride, no slower, no softer. Time did not humble him. It only thinned the world around him until he could see through it completely. Where others saw progress, he saw repetition. Where others saw wisdom, he saw memory wearing a new name. People asked him more often now, "Do you regret it?" The life, the choices, the solitude. He'd smile, a crooked, half-sincere thing, and say, "I regret needing to be asked that." He didn't hate the question. He just saw what it revealed, that most people confuse regret with discomfort. But Diogenes didn't crave comfort. He'd cut it out of himself like rot. He knew that to regret truth is to beg for the mask again. And he'd burned his long ago. He lived long enough to be outlived by enemies, outlasted by trends. New philosophers arose, softer and more agreeable. Stoics with refined manners, skeptics with scrolls, Epicureans with gardens. They dressed better. They spoke gently. They were welcome in homes. He wasn't. He'd never be. But they all of them, had borrowed something from him. A word, a posture, a refusal. They didn't quote him often, but he was in the cracks of their certainty. One day, he came upon a boy drowning a mouse. No reason, just cruelty. Diogenes didn't shout, didn't strike. He crouched beside the child and whispered, "You will remember this longer than the mouse did." Then he walked away. The boy cried, not from guilt, not yet, but from the sudden, painful clarity of being observed by someone who needed nothing from him. That's what made Diogenes unbearable. He had no leverage to lose. His truth couldn't be negotiated. He grew thinner, not from illness, but from shedding. He ate less, moved less, spoke only when silence failed. Some thought he was dying. He wasn't. He was finishing. The difference is subtle, but precise. He wasn't being taken by death. He was handing himself over, bit by bit. Each day, another piece of illusion stripped, another tether undone. When asked if he feared dying alone, he laughed. Have you seen how many people die surrounded? He never stopped mocking temples. But near the end, he spent more time around one, not praying, just sitting on the steps, listening to what people begged for. Health, wealth, peace, answers. He listened and sometimes whispered replies. Not blessings, just translations. You don't want answers, he told one merchant. You want permission. To another, you don't want peace. You want quiet lies. They never argued. They only left. One evening, during a storm, he stood in the rain, cloak soaked, arms bare. A guard shouted, "Get inside, fool, co." Diogenes looked up, blinking through water. Inside, what? He said, and it wasn't defiance. It was a real question. What could possibly shelter a man who had already stepped beyond comfort, need, and approval? He didn't seek dryness. He sought honesty, and the storm gave it freely. When a young man asked how to live a good life, Diogenes replied, "Live so that nothing you say needs to be remembered, only what you do." It wasn't advice. It was warning. In a world of speeches and self-made statues, he had chosen disappearance. Not erasure, just transparency. He wanted to be like wind through olive trees, felt but not held. And as the years thinned into whispers, his voice did too. Not weaker, just quieter. He spoke rarely, but when he did, it struck like bare feet on cold marble. He no longer needed to bark. His silence had grown teeth of its own. They say his last days were indistinguishable from the rest. No bed, no farewell, no shift in posture that suggested the end was near. He woke with the sun, drank from his hands, walked the length of the agora, and sat in his usual spot, like the stone had been waiting for him all night. He watched people walk in circles, chase shadows, speak with urgency about things that would be forgotten by dusk. He smiled more often now, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly, as if he had become the only one in the city who truly understood the script and had no interest in reciting it anymore. There were fewer arguments, fewer students asking questions. Not because they'd stopped caring, but because they began to understand. Diogenes didn't teach like others. He didn't explain. He revealed. He held up a mirror smeared with dirt and dared you to look at your reflection long enough for the dirt to belong to you. Those who stayed didn't seek comfort. They sought a fire cold enough to burn away the parts of themselves that lied. One of his followers once asked if it was exhausting, always resisting, always confronting. Diogenes stared at him and said, "I stopped resisting long ago. I just don't join the parade." And that's how he moved through life. Not as a rebel in battle, but as an absence that couldn't be filled with titles, robes, or applause. He didn't fight the world. He simply refused to wear its skin. When children asked where he lived, he'd wave a hand at everything and say, "Here." When they asked if he was rich, he'd dig in the dirt and say, "More than you." When they asked if he was alone, he'd nod, then say, "Alone is not the same as abandoned." It was his calm that made it land. He never barked at children. He let them ask. He let them stay. In his final weeks, he stopped eating for days at a time. No one noticed at first. He'd already trained the city to expect so little from him. Or maybe he had trained them to believe he needed nothing. When someone finally offered him a fig and he refused, they paused. "I'm full," he said, touching his chest. "Of what?" the boy asked. "Of enough." He didn't write about death. He didn't talk about it. He didn't treat it like an event. To Diogenes, death was simply the last illusion. The final performance people feared because it couldn't be faked. He planned nothing. He made no speech. He gave no parting gift. Instead, he sat one morning in the barrel, legs folded, back straight, eyes half closed. People walked past. Someone waved. He didn't wave back. The sun rose. He didn't move. By dusk, the bowl beside him was untouched. The dog that often lay at his feet had wandered off. A child poked his foot. Nothing. A woman drew closer. She whispered his name. Then, louder. Nothing. He had left exactly how he lived. Publicly, quietly, without asking anyone for permission. They say someone offered to build him a tomb. Others protested. He wouldn't want that. Eventually, they placed a small stone near his barrel, etched with a single word. Kappa, Y, Omega, Nu. Dog. It was both insult and honor. A word that meant mutt, beast, stray. And now, philosopher. The city never replaced him. They couldn't, because there are many who speak truth in comfort. Few who live it in full exposure. And only one who never asked to be remembered, but was, anyway. Cynicism is not anger. It is not rebellion. It is not performance. It is war. But a quiet one, fought not on fields, but within the body. A slow-burning conflict between what you are and what the world tells you to be, between instinct and instruction, between breath and branding. The cynic does not throw stones. He removes masks, one by one, until there is nothing left to please and nothing left to fear. To live without illusion is not romantic. It is not clean. It is not peaceful. It means eating whatever doesn't kill you. It means pissing where you stand. It means being stared at, talked about, avoided, misunderstood, and staying anyway. It means refusing to clothe yourself in borrowed purpose. The cynic isn't angry at the world. He just won't let it into his bones. He sees what others don't dare to name. That most lives are stories we're bribed into telling ourselves. That shame is a leash. That routine is armor. That politeness is often betrayal in fine robes. The cynic watches a man flatter his boss, a woman pray for luck, a child gets scolded for asking why, and sees a single thing: conditioning, civilization as hypnosis, wrapped in words like duty, manners, pride. The cynic doesn't destroy culture. He ignores it. He does not kneel before shrines or crowds or titles. He does not believe virtue can be taught, only remembered. He does not seek applause. Applause is the sound of people trying to convince themselves they understand you. Because a bark, at least, is honest. His war is not with others. It's with the self that wants to belong, that craves approval, that flinches when laughed at, that softens when praised. The cynic wages this war by removing everything that feeds the hunger to be seen as good. He strips himself, not just of things, but of roles, scripts, explanations. He becomes simple, then simpler, then unbearable. He learns the body first, its needs, its lies. Hunger teaches what truth cannot. Cold sharpens awareness. Dirt removes pretense. A man who sleeps on stone does not pretend to be better than the rat. He is the rat, and the rat, too, lives. The cynic watches his cravings like snakes. He doesn't kill them. He studies their movement. When they rise, he names them. Not sin, not fault, just desire, just fear, just fear, just habit. He embraces the public, not to belong, but to confront. The city is his crucible. To walk naked among clothed men is not shame, it is alchemy. To eat scraps under the gaze of rich men is not weakness, it is purification. He dares them to look, not because he wants them to change, but because he wants them to feel the mask slip for even a second. If they do, they might never sleep the same. He carries few things, because each thing is a question. Do you need this, or were you taught to want it? A bowl, a cloak, a staff. Each item must justify its place. Even thoughts are treated this way. Cynicism is not thoughtless. It is ruthless thought, boiled down until only the pulse remains. What is real? What is habit? What is rot? And when asked what he stands for, the cynic answers with breath. Because philosophy, for him, is not a system. It is survival. Not a path, but a burning away. He walks not forward, not toward truth, but away from everything that isn't it. That is the war, not against society, but against becoming its echo. To walk as a cynic is to become visible in a way most people spend their lives avoiding. You do not dress to signal status. You do not speak to win favor. You do not shrink beneath insult or rise beneath praise. You are simply there, exposed, without decoration, without defense, and that is why they stare. Not because you are grotesque, but because you are real, and reality, stripped of polish, unsettles the sleepwalkers. Most men live in soft cages built of compliments and shame. The cynic kicks at the bars, not to escape. He's already outside, but to make the others look up. Sometimes they curse him for it. Sometimes they laugh. Most pretend not to hear. But he never begs for their attention. He simply walks, barefoot, covered in dust, unburdened by who he's supposed to be. The war is slow. There are no trumpets, no banners, just the endless question. What part of this is real? When you eat, is it because you're hungry or because it's noon? When you bow, is it respect or fear? When you speak, is it to share or to protect a self-image that doesn't exist? The cynic doesn't answer. He subtracts. If it's not necessary, it goes. If it's a performance, it stops. He uses his body as the battleground. He walks in heat, cold, hunger, not for glory, but for clarity. Pain sharpens. Simplicity cuts through illusion. When the city rushes toward comfort, the cynic walks the other way, dragging the heavy chains of truth behind him like a clanking reminder that freedom is heavier than slavery and worth more. He is not kind in the usual sense. He will not flatter you. He will not soothe your lies, but he is fair. He will eat with you if you're honest. He will share his last fig. He will sit beside you in silence until the masks fall off. And when they do, he will not say, "I told you so." He will only nod, like someone who's seen many masks fall and knows another will grow back soon. His speech is short, not because he lacks words, but because most are unnecessary. Look, stop, ask again. These are his sermons. No scroll, no sacred doctrine. The only temple he trusts is the body that can sleep in the dirt and still wake whole. The only scripture he reads is the way people flinch when faced with something too raw to ignore. Cynicism, at its core, is not contempt, it's grief. Grief for what men trade away. Grief for truth, spoken once and then buried beneath ceremony. Grief for the soul, bent into posture by the weight of needing to be accepted. And from that grief, laughter, sharp, strange, uncomfortable laughter. The cynic laughs not because it's funny, but because it's too absurd to cry over again. People ask if he's free. The better question is, what's left in him that can be chained? He has no debt, no reputation, no fear of being seen at his worst. Because he shows it all the time, there's no angle to use against him, no scandal to expose. He already exposed himself. He does not ask the world to change. That would be another form of control. He simply refuses to be remade. He doesn't fight the river. He steps out of it, watches others drown in style, watches them decorate their sinking ships with banners that say meaning, watches them beg the current to slow down. He just watches, silent, dry, and untouched. And this is his revolution. Not loud, not violent, but visible. He lives in a way that cannot be dismissed, even if it is mocked. He lives as a question with no polite answer. And those who look at him too long may find themselves asking it too. The cynic is not an example. He is a mirror. He does not offer a better way to live. He simply reveals what your life is when the noise stops. He doesn't say, "Be like me." He says, "Look at you." And few can. Not for long. Because when you strip away the stories, the schedules, the expectations, what's left is not a philosophy, it's a silence. A heavy, breathing silence that demands you answer without words. The cynic lives inside that silence. He doesn't belong to the city, though he walks its streets. He doesn't belong to the people, though he speaks to them. He doesn't even belong to a tradition, though later schools will name him father, icon, enemy. The cynic belongs only to the space between truth and its denial. And he stretches that space wide, holds it open with dirty fingernails, and dares others to walk through. Few do. Most throw stones instead. You will not find him in temples. He's seen too many gods carved in the image of fear. You will not find him in courts. He's heard too much justice bought by clever tongues. You will not find him at festivals. He has no need for pageantry. You will find him where no one looks, near the well, under the steps, beside the dogs, watching, always, ever hiding, just unmoved. The cynic uses shame like a rope ladder. He climbs down into it, descends past embarrassment, past rejection, past the human need to be good. At the bottom, he finds something unshakable, A version of himself that doesn't need to be loved to be real. And from that place, he speaks or doesn't. It doesn't matter. The message is already in the way he stands, the way he breathes, the way he eats with his hands. Pain, for him, is not a curse. It is a language. When his stomach aches, it says, "You are not dead." When his joints complain, they say, "You are still here." He listens. He answers. He does not run from discomfort. He studies it. That's why he's feared. Not because he's strong, but because he's willing to feel what others hide from, hew, and still remain standing. Every insult, every blow, every eye that turns away, these are tests, not attacks. The cynic accepts them the way stone accepts rain, without flinching, without gratitude. He endures, not because he's numb, but because he's already chosen what matters. And none of this touches it. When you ask him what he believes, he may not answer. If he does, it will sound too simple to be philosophy. Don't lie. Eat less. Walk light. Need little. These aren't rules. They're leftovers. Scraps from a fire that burned down everything fake. They won't make you wise. They'll make you honest if you let them. Cynicism is not the absence of belief. It is belief boiled down to bone. It is the refusal to decorate suffering. It is the art of walking through fire without pretending you're made of anything but ash and will. And when the cynic dies, when the last bite is taken, the last dog wanders off, the last fig is shared, there is no ceremony, just a body returning to dust. No less sacred for its silence, no less remembered for its refusal. To the ordinary citizen, the cynic looks broken, dirty, alone, barefoot in the rain. But that's only because they're using the wrong scale. They measure success by comfort, dignity by dress, wisdom by reputation. The cynic measures nothing. He weighs. He tests, not to prove a point, but to remain awake. He doesn't reject the world out of bitterness. He simply can't pretend anymore. Once illusion is named, it cannot be worn comfortably again. And he has named every one of them. He knows that the mind is a mimic. It picks up the voices around it, wears their concerns, inherits their fears. So he unlearns daily, ruthlessly. He takes his thoughts to the river and washes them. If they stain his fingers, they go. If they can't stand hunger or silence, they go. If they begin with should, they go. Cynicism is not detachment. It is intimacy with the unbearable. It's sleeping beside the gutter and noticing the stars. It's watching a wealthy man deny food to a slave and feeling both the disgust and the sadness without turning away. It is standing still while the city spins and hearing the gears grind. Not trying to stop them, not letting them grind your bones. He is poor, yes, but not impoverished. His poverty is not lack, but clarity. He owns nothing because he's tired of being owned. He begs not to manipulate, but to reveal. Watch how the giver hesitates. Watch how the passerby flinches. Watch how the coin becomes a confession. The cynic turns every interaction into a mirror and dares you to look past your reflection. He knows shame is a collar handed out at birth. Don't be seen, they whisper. Don't be wrong. Don't be too much. The cynic chews the collar off, stands in the square, scratches himself, speaks plainly, farts loudly. Because only when your body is free from control can your mind begin to speak in its own voice. He refuses legacy, doesn't write, doesn't instruct, doesn't claim. He dies as he lived, unbranded, unrepeatable. And yet, centuries later, here we are, still whispering his name, still half laughing, half wincing when we hear his stories. Because some truths don't ask to be remembered, they haunt. He is not without pain. He is not above grief. But he wears them openly, like weather. They visit, they pass. He doesn't hide them behind ritual or distraction. A broken rib, a rotting tooth, a hungry night. These are not tragedies to him. They are reminders that the body is honest, that suffering is shared, and that dignity is not the absence of wounds, but the refusal to pretend they aren't bleeding. He trusts no creed, no system, no organized truth. If an idea needs a temple to survive, he lets it die. If a god demands sacrifice, he asks why a god would need anything at all. His beliefs are too wild to be caged in prayer. He believes in hunger, in sky, in the sound a man makes when he's finally run out of lies. And if you sit beside him long enough, without speaking, without asking, something may fall away. Not everything, not suddenly, but a layer, a voice, a name. You may feel it lifting, and you might realize this isn't just philosophy. This isn't just philosophy without knives, without permission. There is no temple for the cynic because truth in its rawest form resists enclosure. It does not want incense. It wants air. It wants the skin of your feet on hot stone. It wants the bite of hunger before the first fig. The cynic knows that the moment truth, it becomes performance. The moment it is quoted, it becomes currency. So he stops speaking when words become too smooth. He lets silence hold the weight. You won't see him looking at the stars and calling it poetry. He won't offer metaphors when a dog licking its own wounds says more than any scroll ever could. The world is already speaking. The cynic doesn't interrupt it. He points. That is his role. Not to guide, but to reveal. Not to heal, but to expose the wound without pretending it isn't there. In this war, this existential burning, the enemy is not others. It is narrative, the need to be someone, to be perceived a certain way, to be understood. The cynic has buried that need. It fought hard. It dressed up as humility, as mission, even as kindness. But in the end, it wanted the same thing every mask wants: control. So he let it die, slowly, with discomfort, and finally, with relief. He doesn't ask to be believed. That would mean he wants something from you. He doesn't. He offers no identity to follow. He leaves no instruction manual. He leaves a shape in the dirt, a man-shaped absence that once refused to kneel. A man who showed his ribs and his refusal and did not apologize for any of them. And so the cynic becomes unbearable. Not because he attacks, but because he won't play along. You bring him gifts, he throws them away. You offer him comfort, he offers you questions. You ask him what life means. He asks why you need it to mean anything. His presence is a splinter, small, silent, always reminding. Still, he is not cruel. Cruelty requires distance, superiority, a desire to watch others squirm. The cynic gets close, sits beside you, eats your bread without flattery, laughs at your robes without envy. When you weep, he doesn't offer wisdom, only presence. He's seen enough pain to know that most advice is distraction dressed as love. He embraces contradiction. He doesn't need consistency to feel whole. One day, he blesses the rain. The next, he curses the wind. One day, he walks in silence. The next, he barks at a priest. It's not hypocrisy. It's refusal to freeze. To be a cynic is to remain fluid, to never become a statue, even of yourself. He believes in nothing that cannot survive solitude. If an idea needs applause, it rots in silence. If a belief collapses when no one's watching, it wasn't a belief. It was performance. The cynic lives only what he can carry in his mouth, in his gut, on his back. The rest is furniture. And he's long since left the house. If you ask him what he lives for, he may shrug. Not out of arrogance, but because the question no longer fits. He doesn't live for, he just lives. And in a world addicted to purpose, that might be the most terrifying truth of all. What does it mean to live with nothing? Not just no money, no home, but no story to lean on when the night gets cold. No title to cushion the blows. No future held up like a shield. The cynic knows. He lives in that emptiness, not as punishment, but as space. Space to breathe without pretending. Space to move without proving. Most people collect objects, names, victories. The cynic sheds. He sheds comfort, certainty, audience. He leaves behind everything that requires pretending to maintain. Because he's not interested in what impresses others. He's only interested in what survives silence. He does not ask you to join him. He doesn't build schools because that would mean anchoring truth in place. And he knows truth is not a pillar, it is a wind. It moves, it erodes, it tears away what isn't rooted in need. The cynic has no need for permanence. He doesn't leave teachings. He leaves tension. A tension you carry long after he's gone. In your pocket, in your mirror. In the soft winds you feel when you praise too much. He sits still, often, on a wall, by a gate. On the steps of a temple he refuses to enter, and people ask, what is he doing? The answer is always the same. Less than you. Because most people spend their days in frantic effort to prove they are real. He exists, and lets that be enough. He knows there's no such thing as too far. He's already gone beyond. He's lived days with only water and wind. Nights with only a cloak and the sound of rats. He's been mocked, spit on, stepped over. He's felt his ribs, his rage, his refusal, and still he remained. What could anyone take from him that he hasn't already given away? He trusts no architecture of status, not robes, not degrees, not bloodlines. You could be a king or a beggar. He sees the same tremble behind your eyes. He speaks to you without flinching. He calls out the lie you told yourself this morning. He points to the cup you don't need, the God you only pray to when afraid, the kindness you show only when watched, not to shame you, to free you, if you can stand it. People often misread him. They think he hates joy, but the cynic laughs more than most. His joy is not manicured. It's not polite. It's loud, sudden, cracked wide open. He laughs when a fig falls from a tree and no one's there to claim it. He laughs when a merchant trips on his own sandals. He laughs when a child tells the truth adults are afraid to say. He laughs because he's lost the fear of being undignified. He will die like he lived, outdoors, unexpected, unrecorded, no tomb, no biography, no final words carved in stone. But you will remember him, not because of what he built, but because of what he refused to build. His life is a shadow cast by fire, a presence defined by absence, a man-shaped silence you can't quite explain. And if one day you find yourself staring at your life, your objects, your followers, your purpose, and feel the sudden urge to throw it all into the sea, that voice in your chest, that's him still fighting, still free. There is a lie that we are taught early, that dignity is something you wear, that it lives in posture, in clean speech, in polished sandals. The cynic burned that lie long ago. He walks barefoot, not to suffer, but to remember. He squats in the street, not to provoke, but to rest. He farts, spits, scratches, stares, not for theater, but because the body has no shame unless someone teaches it. And he's done being taught. He knows people fear the raw, not because it harms, but because it interrupts the spell of being civil, the spell of being someone. The cynic doesn't break that spell with violence. He just doesn't participate in it. He steps outside it, like stepping out of a festival where everyone's wearing masks and wondering why they can't breathe. He lives with a kind of discipline that cannot be admired from a distance. It smells, it shivers, it limps, it offends. You cannot respect it without risking everything you call respectable. That's why so many laugh, because it's easier to laugh than to follow. But behind the laughter is discomfort, and behind that, hunger. A hunger for something real, even if it's bitter. He walks past temples with open doors and never enters. Not because he denies the gods, but because he refuses the bargains. Do this, and you will be safe. Pray, and you will be seen. The cynic knows, if the divine needs tribute, it's not divine. If truth needs kneeling, it's not truth. He worships nothing, and in that touches something sacred most will never name. You might mistake him for hopeless, but look closer. He notices everything. A fig ripening early, the way someone's eye twitches when lying, the crack in a wall that wasn't there yesterday. He is not numb. He is sharpened. His senses uncluttered by noise, by guilt, by pretending. He lives in a constant state of attention. It's the rest of the world that's sleepwalking. Pain visits him. Yes, hunger, cold, insult. But it doesn't linger. He gives it no story. He doesn't say, "Why me?" He says, "Here it is." Then moves on. No drama, no poem, just breath. That is his greatest rebellion, refusing to be a victim of what he accepts. He has no plans, no legacy to tend, no writings to defend. His ideas live in fragments, stories, impressions. He passes through history like smoke, impossible to grab, but unmistakable once you've smelled it. He is not a founder. He is a crack, a split in the wall of comfort through which cold air enters and wakes you up. There is strength in him, but it is the quiet kind. Not the strength to lead armies, but the strength to sleep outside while others feast, to be laughed at without shrinking, to need nothing from the crowd, and still walk through it without bitterness. That kind of strength doesn't shine. It burns low and constant, like coals under ash. He does not romanticize poverty. He does not call suffering noble. But he understands that the cost of truth is high, adding blood, invisibility. To live without fiction means being seen naked by others, by yourself. Most would rather die dressed. The cynic has already buried the costume, and when the wind howls and the night is cruel, and no one remembers his name, he lies on cold stone, pulls his cloak over his chest, and whispers not a prayer, but a fact. Nothing owns me. Power doesn't knock when it enters. It arrives with sandals that never touch dust. It arrives with guards, with silence before it, with whispers after it. And one day it arrived for Diogenes in the form of Alexander, the boy king, the future storm. The city bent itself before him. Diogenes did not. He was lying in the sun, half asleep, the way a cat might lie after a long argument with hunger. And the boy, cloaked in ambition and silk, asked the old man what he could offer him. Diogenes opened one eye. The light behind it was ancient, bone deep. He saw not a king. He saw another man carrying too much. And so he said the only thing that mattered. Yes, step out of my sunlight. The words fell like a stone in still water. No insult, no praise, just refusal. Refusal to be impressed. Refusal to perform. Refusal to pretend that any man, no matter how gilded, could block the sky, and not be told so. There were no cheers, no guards seized him. Alexander laughed, that startled, hollow laugh of a man unused to being denied. And then he said, "If I were not Alexander, I would be Diogenes." It was the highest compliment Diogenes never asked for, and he didn't return it. He simply closed his eyes again. The conversation was finished. Not because the king left, but because truth had been spoken. That moment lingered in Athens like smoke after a torch. People spoke of it with awe, with confusion. How could one man, naked and hungry, turn a king into a child? But the cynic had no hunger for hierarchy. He'd seen too many leaders trembling behind gold, too many generals afraid to be alone. What use is a crown if you can't sleep on the ground? Diogenes didn't seek kings. He sought contradiction. And where better to find it than in palaces, where people speak of virtue while stepping over slaves, where laws are carved in stone but rewritten in private rooms. He wandered near these places not to protest, but to observe. He was a witness, not a rebel. His resistance was stillness. He was once invited to a banquet. A nobleman wanted to show the city his generosity. Silver bowls, dancers, garlands, speeches that lasted longer than the bread stayed warm. Diogenes arrived late, wearing only his cloak, which, as always, carried the scent of open air and human indifference. When offered wine, he asked if it would make the host more honest. When offered meat, he asked who had died more, the animal or the cook's pride. The room didn't know whether to laugh or leave. He sat on the floor and ate grapes with a dog beneath the table. Someone said he was mocking the feast. He replied, "I'm honoring the only one here who knows why he's eating." That was Diogenes, not against luxury, against confusion. He didn't hate gold. He just hated forgetting why we want it. He spent time near the courts, too, where men spoke in perfect phrases to mask imperfect deeds, where victims became defendants, and justice dressed itself in technicalities. He never spoke during trials. He watched, and when the crowd gasped, he yawned. Not because he didn't care, but because he'd seen this show too many times. Power pretending to be fairness. Revenge pretending to be law. Sometimes he would squat outside the courthouse and relieve himself. Someone once shouted, "This is sacred ground." Diogenes looked up, then behind him, then back. "Where?" he asked. There was no sarcasm. Just a man who had stopped believing that walls made things holy. He was a constant presence in the public square, and yet never part of the public game, while others jockeyed for attention. Louder voices, brighter robes, bigger gestures. Diogenes became invisible by becoming too visible. Too raw, to romanticize, too close to strip away. You could not use him for virtue signaling. He didn't allow it. Stand too near, and you risked being seen for who you were when no one's watching. He called out hypocrisy, not with shouting, but with stillness. When a rich man praised humility, Diogenes simply held out a hand. The man hesitated, then dropped a coin, slowly, carefully, as if offering it to fire. Diogenes looked at it, then at the man, and said, "You dropped more shame than silver." The coin stayed on the ground. Neither of them picked it up. Children watched him with fascination, adults with discomfort. But the children were often braver. They asked him questions the way only the young can, honestly, without agenda. Why don't you wear shoes? Why do you sleep outside? Why do people hate you if you're telling the truth? Diogenes never pushed them away. He answered in gestures, pointing, shrugging. Sometimes just being there was the answer. The truth didn't need explaining. It needed unlearning. He wandered freely between the layers of society. One day, sitting with slaves, laughing over broken figs. The next, walking straight through a gathering of philosophers mid-lecture, yawning loudly as if chasing away ghosts. He didn't recognize social boundaries, not because he was rude, but because he didn't see them. The divisions between rich and poor, clean and unclean, high and low. They were all carved into stone by men terrified of seeing their reflection in others. He was once invited to speak to a crowd of young men training in rhetoric. They wanted insight. Instead, he stood silent. Minutes passed. The students grew restless. One asked, "Well, what do we say?" Diogenes looked up and replied, "You've practiced talking. Practice shutting up." Then he walked away. It was a crack that would split open later at night, in bed, when the masks slid off and the boy realized his tongue had never been silent long enough to listen. Sometimes he'd sit in the middle of a busy street and simply exist. Eyes closed, legs crossed, still as a tree stump. People stepped around him, cursed, laughed. Once, a guard told him to move. Diogenes opened one eye and said, "Where should I go that is more honest than here?" The guard had no answer. He left. That was the pattern. The more people tried to box him in, the more obvious the box became. In every court, every palace, every dinner filled with wine and moral debate, Diogenes was the unwelcome guest, not because he broke the rules, but because he revealed them. He didn't steal bread. He stole comfort. He didn't raise fists. He raised questions, not abstract ones, not safe ones, but the kind that made your fingers itch when no one was looking. He didn't seek equality, he embodied it, sat with beggars and generals the same way, cross-legged, unimpressed. If you fed him, he ate. If you cursed him, he listened. If you ignored him, he smiled, because he didn't need your reaction. He only needed your mask to slip, even for a second. And in that second, he won. Not over you, but over illusion. He was just reminding it what it looked like before the costumes were sewn. Every city has its rituals. The careful dance of ego in public spaces. The way men greet each other too loudly. The way women lower their voices when crossing sacred thresholds. The way status drips from fingers and phrases. And even how long someone pauses before answering a question. Diogenes didn't reject these rituals. He exposed them by refusing to join. His silence made their noise obvious. His stillness made their performance painful. One afternoon, he was seen sitting outside the house of a famous orator. The man's followers gathered around, asking if Diogenes came to debate. "No," he said, "I'm just waiting to see if wisdom ever walks out." The crowd laughed uneasily. The door never opened. Later that week, the orator gave a long speech on humility. Diogenes did not attend. His absence was louder than any rebuttal. He had no patience for speeches made of borrowed language. He once heard a young politician quote Plato, then Socrates, then Homer, all within the same breath. When the crowd clapped, Diogenes walked up, spit on the ground, and said, "Next time, bring your own words." That was his curse, and his genius. He could smell performance the way a dog smells fear. He didn't walk like a poor man. He walked like a man with nowhere to be, and nothing to hide. That was his status. That was his terror. You couldn't bribe him, blackmail him, seduce him, or flatter him. His loyalty was not for sale because he owed nothing to anyone, not even to the name Diogenes. Some said he went by other names before. Some said he had no name at all. Just the bark and the silence after. He mocked philosophers not because he hated ideas, but because he hated how ideas were used to avoid life. "You debate about motion," he once said, "but you haven't walked anywhere." When a student asked if he believed in the soul, Diogenes lifted his tunic and said, "If you can't find it here, where else would it live?" People called it vulgar. He called it honest. Sometimes he would sit outside the bathhouses and observe men leaving, glistening, perfumed, smiling, clean on the skin. He'd mutter, but still filthy behind the eyes. Not because they bathed, but because they believed cleanliness was proof of goodness. The cynic had dirt beneath his nails, but his conscience, what little he still bothered to carry, was transparent. He had no servants, no students, but he had shadows. Men who followed him just far enough to feel bold, but not so far they had to change. They copied his posture, his phrases, even his tone. He ignored them. If they stayed long enough to lose themselves, he might call them brothers. If they asked how to become like him, he told them, "Start by losing everything you love that isn't real." He didn't write, not because he couldn't, but because he refused to trap his thoughts on paper. "Let the dust carry it," he said once. "It remembers longer," and maybe he was right. Maybe the dust on the steps where he sat still knows the sound of his breath. Maybe the stones where he pissed are wiser than 1,000 scrolls. He didn't plan, but somehow, everywhere he went, attention followed, not the adoring kind, but the anxious kind. The kind of attention you give to a fire near dry wood. No one knew what he'd say next, or do, or refuse. He was unpredictable only because he no longer obeyed the rules that make men predictable. Fear, hunger, flattery. He had burned those out of himself long ago. There was one corner of the city where Diogenes lingered more than usual, near the slave markets, not to buy, not to protest, but to witness. He would lean against a pillar, arms crossed, expression unreadable, as men and women were examined like livestock, teeth inspected, backs prodded, prices shouted. Sometimes buyers glanced at Diogenes as if to say, "What are you doing here?" He never answered aloud. He just stayed. One day, a merchant asked him mockingly, looking to buy dog. Diogenes nodded. Yes, he said, but not a body, a man. The crowd laughed. The merchant frowned. The slave beside him, a boy no older than 15, looked at Diogenes and didn't laugh at all. He just stared. That was enough. That was always enough. It said he was once captured by pirates, taken far from Athens, sold into slavery himself. When asked what he could do, he said, "I can rule men." They laughed, but he was bought anyway. And within months, he was advising his master, who eventually freed him. Diogenes didn't flee. He stayed until the master no longer needed him. Then he walked away. No anger, no bond, just breath and distance. He understood that freedom wasn't in the absence of chains, but in the absence of need. You could be free in a cell and enslaved in a villa. You could wear a crown and still flinch when someone raised their voice. Diogenes didn't flinch, because no one owned his name, his hunger, or his shame. He had chewed through all three. His presence in high places never lasted long. He would walk into gatherings of politicians, nod once, then pick his teeth or piss in a corner. They called him mad, but deep down they knew what he was doing, refusing the trance, breaking the script, making it impossible to pretend that virtue lives in marble rooms. They didn't fear his words. They feared the silence after them. He mocked statues, but bowed to dogs. Not out of cynicism, but consistency. A statue demands reverence without effort. A dog demands nothing and gives presents in return. Diogenes once fed a limping mutt before a man who asked for advice. When questioned, he said, "The dog doesn't lie about being hungry." The man left. The dog stayed. He did not seek purity. He didn't cleanse himself in rivers or fast for days as a ritual. He didn't offer himself as an example. His body was scarred, bitten, bruised. But that, to him, was more honest than polished skin hiding rot. The city's heroes wore laurels. Diogenes wore whatever survived sleep. Once, at a public ceremony, while a respected philosopher gave a speech on temperance and humility, Diogenes walked to the center of the gathering, squatted, and relieved himself. He didn't speak. He didn't laugh. When asked later why, he said, "I wanted to see which they respected more, the words or the floor." The philosopher never returned to that square. Power needs illusion, the illusion of control, of sacredness, of hierarchy. Diogenes was a puncture in that veil, not an assassin, just a leak, a reminder that under the gold and incense, the human body still itches, hungers, rots. He didn't glorify decay. He simply didn't cover it with perfume. He didn't hate people, he hated pretense. That's an important distinction. When he barked at a politician or stared too long at a priest, it wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. He could see through the robes, the titles, the careful phrases. He saw the boy who wanted to be loved, the man who feared being found out, the elder clinging to borrowed wisdom. He didn't shame them. He simply refused to pretend he didn't notice. He had no enemies, only those who were afraid to be seen. They called him obscene, undignified, heretical, but no one ever called him dishonest. That was the line they couldn't cross. Even those who mocked him in public would sometimes send their servants at night, quietly, without torches, to ask him questions, not about virtue or metaphysics, but about fear, about sleep, about loneliness. The things you can't ask in daylight. He never gave them comfort, only presence. He didn't soothe. He didn't uplift. He told them the walls they had built around their souls were too clean to breathe in. He told them their virtues stank of performance, and still they came. Not because he had answers, but because he had stopped asking for permission to exist. It's said that one evening he sat in a noble's courtyard during a wedding feast. Music played, servants bustled, guests toasted to love. Diogenes sat cross-legged near the entrance, chewing olives, watching. A young bride passed him, eyes downcast. She paused, looked at him, and whispered, "Is this joy?" He didn't reply. He simply raised one eyebrow. She looked away and walked inside. Later, someone asked what she meant. He shrugged. "You'd know if it was." That was how he entered people, quietly, like a draft under the door. He didn't argue. He didn't debate. He just was, in the one place no one wanted a mirror, the place between certainty and performance. He lived there permanently. They only visited when their sleep broke. He didn't ask the world to follow him, but the world followed, with coins, with curses, with questions. He answered none of them fully, not because he was clever, but because he knew truth delivered too early is just another script. He offered discomfort instead, like an itch beneath polished robes. In the courts, he'd sometimes sit beside the accused, not to offer defense, but presence, just to show someone could be there without asking for gain. When asked why, he said, "They have everyone's attention, no one's company." He understood the loneliness of spectacle. He understood that guilt isn't always in the deed. Sometimes it's in the silence before the judgment. He was once fined for public indecency. The clerk asked where he lived. Diogenes pointed to the street. "Your occupation, man, your defense. That you're asking those questions proves I've already lost." The fine was never collected. The clerk never returned to that post, And when invited to dine with a governor, he arrived barefoot, cloak damp, carrying a half-eaten onion. The guest stared. He sat without invitation, peeled the onion, and began to eat. When asked if he would wash his hands, he said, "They're already cleaner than your mouths." No one spoke to him again. He didn't mind. He never expected anything real to happen in a dining room with too many chairs. He wasn't trying to escape society. He lived in the middle of it, among the smells, the shouting, the beggars, the merchants, the statues, the blood. But he never belonged to it. He was like smoke in a banquet hall, impossible to hold, impossible to ignore. A man who showed you, just by being there, how much of your life was lived in fear of being seen without your costume. He visited brothels without shame, not as a customer, but as a student. He said that honesty lives closer to nakedness than to policy, that people are truer in sweat than in speech. Once he watched a man exit, adjusting his cloak, eyes down, flushed. Diogenes said, "Strange how you can spend gold for truth and still lie on the way out." Sometimes he'd enter temples only to lie down in the center, not to worship, to rest. When challenged by priests, he would say, "If the gods are real, they'll forgive me. If they're not, it's a clean floor." He had no war with the divine. He just refused middlemen, refused theatrics, refused to bow where he hadn't seen something worth kneeling for. His presence was tolerated only because it was unclassifiable. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a sage. He didn't belong to any school, and yet everyone knew him. By posture, by smell, by silence. He carried no symbols, no scrolls, no disciples, only dogs, sometimes, and dust. You couldn't predict him. And that made him dangerous. The elite tried to forget him, but they quoted him when it suited them. Even Diogenes said, became a fashionable preface. They wore his words like cloaks, never noticing the man himself had burned his. He never corrected them. He had no need to defend what was never for sale. Once, a visiting philosopher from Asia asked him, "What is the secret to happiness?" Diogenes stood, walked to the edge of the square, squatted, and relieved himself. "It begins," he said, "with remembering that even your questions stink like everyone else's." The philosopher returned home, changed, not enlightened, just quieter. He treated women no differently than men, which, in his time, was a rebellion. He spoke to them directly, not flatteringly, not cruelly, just directly. Some found it offensive. Some found it liberating. One said, "You are the only man who looks at me like I'm not made of glass." He replied, "You are not made of anything fragile." That's their lie, not yours. He was spat on, hit, mocked, and ignored. But he was also fed, sheltered, listened to. Not out of duty, out of something stranger. Respect without liking. People didn't like Diogenes, but they believed him. That made him more powerful than kings who ruled through affection or fear. His power was simpler. You couldn't corrupt him because there was nothing left to buy. He lived close to death, always, not because he was reckless, but because he refused to insulate himself from reality. He walked into plague zones. He helped bury strangers. He didn't fear disease. He feared forgetting that bones are bones, no matter the skin that covered them. When a man once asked what he thought about mortality, Diogenes said, "You speak as if it's optional." The city aged, and so did he. Though you wouldn't know it by the way he moved. His bones cracked louder. His pauses between words stretched longer. But there was no fear in the change. He'd prepared for this all along. Every missed meal, every cold night, every scraped heel had been practice, not for strength, for surrender. He was learning how to leave before the body did. People still watched him, but the stares changed. Children looked at him with curiosity, elders with a kind of uneasy admiration, and young men with a mixture of envy and shame. He had become something between a ghost and a monument, not officially honored, but impossible to erase. The city's memory had wrapped around him like ivy around a crumbling statue. He never taught in a formal sense, but his presence drew seekers. Some sat near him for weeks, hoping for a lesson. He'd yawn, scratch himself, eat a fig, and say nothing. Eventually, some would ask, "When will you teach us?" He'd shrugged. "I have been." They'd leave, disappointed. Some returned years later. That's how it worked. The truth he gave didn't bloom immediately. It fermented. When he did speak, it was never in abstractions. No treatises on the cosmos. No theories of the soul. Only dirt, hunger, the weight of eyes watching you. The soul, he once said, is the part of you that won't lie when no one's listening. That was as close to doctrine as he ever came. He didn't write about courage. He was courage. Not the kind that fights wars. The kind that sits in a plaza, alone, naked, full of breath, and without apology. The kind that can be hated without hating back. The kind that can lose everything false and still wake up with no regrets. He stayed poor by choice, not fate. He had offers, patronage, invitations to speak, to dine, to be made respectable, safe. He refused them all, because every favor felt like a collar. And once you wear one, even briefly, your neck remembers. He didn't want to be remembered that way. He didn't want to be remembered at all. Just seen while he was here. He never claimed wisdom. He distrusted the word. Wisdom, he said once, is the name fools give to whatever made them feel special last week. Instead, he trusted instinct. He trusted discomfort. He trusted the silence that followed when someone finally told the truth. He aged without ceremony. No house to grow quieter in. No students to carry his sandals. Just breath and skin and wind. He still watched the same corners of the city, the courthouse, the slave block, the temple steps. He still listened, still shook his head, still laughed. The only difference was that he no longer expected anyone to change. But that didn't stop him from showing them how. One night, a woman brought him food. He took it, nodded, and after a long silence, asked her name. She said it softly. He repeated it once. "That's yours," he said. "Never forget it under someone else's." She looked at him, eyes wide. She hadn't spoken to her father in months. She left the food. He never saw her again. And then he was gone. Not with thunder, not with morning choirs or last words etched into marble. No grand farewell, no procession. Just absence, the kind that takes a while to notice. He hadn't been seen for a day, then too. By the third, someone found his cloak folded on a bench near the edge of the city. His bowl cracked. His staff leaning gently against the wall. No sign of struggle. No witness, no ending fit for a story. Which, in truth, was exactly how he'd lived. They whispered about what happened. Some said he wandered into the hills and never came back. Others believed he starved himself quietly, like a candle deciding when to stop burning. A few claimed he was eaten by dogs, the same ones who had once shared his bread. But no one really knew. And that was the most honest ending he could have written, unfinished, uncontrolled, unnamed. No statue was built, no holiday declared. His name lived only in rumors, in half-remembered insults turned parables. In the shiver someone felt when a young man stared too long into the fire and whispered, "There has to be more than this." That was his legacy, not preserved in scrolls, but in the tension people feel when comfort grows too thick and silence gets too loud. The city didn't collapse without him. People still sold olives, still flattered kings, still called themselves wise before proving it. But something had shifted, just slightly, as if a gap had opened, small and jagged in the smooth wall of everyday illusion. A place where questions leaked through. A place shaped like a man who never asked for anything but sunlight. A generation later, a boy passed a beggar sleeping beneath the same steps Diogenes had haunted. He paused, watched, then asked his father, "Is that a bad man?" The father looked down, uncertain. He might be the only honest one here. The boy didn't speak again for a while, and the silence between them, that brief, echoing stillness, was Diogenes still teaching, still biting. He didn't win. He didn't want to. There was no enemy to conquer, no kingdom to build, just falsehood to refuse, just masks to peel, just a life to live so nakedly that no one could mistake it for anything but real. And in the end, he gave the world what it couldn't give him. Nothing, nothing to sell, nothing to hold, nothing to hold. Just a space, just a bark, just a silence.